Hi everyone, George here, the editor of the Sales Transformation Podcast. This week we're taking a look back at some of the highlights from Q2 as we enter the second half of the year. So enjoy the clips and I'll see you back here next week for a brand new episode.
Everything around the sales and how people is navigating the strategy and the business architecture is going to be changed very quickly in the next weeks, months. Not just because of the tariffs. I think this is just a trigger to move fast. Yeah. And I believe that the companies and the individuals that are able to adapt very quickly and try to spot what are the right opportunities where they can get benefit and make progress. This is where probably we will see the champions, because in every crisis you have people that is suffering and staggering, but there are people as well that are championing and finding new opportunities. Yeah. So I remember when we were in Accenture, when I was in Accenture, these kind of years where you had a big problem, political problem or economic problem, those were the years where the consulting was the first one to identify, the consulting industry was the first one to identify where the opportunities lay on and then start to invest. So literally you saw consulting companies investing in these times where the economy is not so good, because it's when you get the opportunities, you see the opportunities, and this is when you jump. Yeah, the first one into that, right?
Yeah, interesting. I think we'll come on to that in a second, but so there's opportunities to be had even in these uncertain times. I mean, one thing's for certain, for salespeople, we can't stop selling. We still have to engage with clients and we have to identify where the opportunities might be.
I went out to sales guys. I think I interviewed about 70 and asked them the same question, right? Outside of an opportunity review, how much coaching do you get? Yeah. What do you think about the coaching that you receive? And what do you think of your leader as a result of the coaching? Now, it turned out I didn't need to ask questions 2 and 3, right? Because 72 salespeople all across the globe answer 0. 0 coaching outside of an opportunity review ever. So then I go and ask them. So they were kind enough to answer the follow-up questions anyway, right? And I'm like, well, what do you think in sales leadership? Don't trust them. They have 0 interest in me. Most of them are idiots. They only care about upper management. They only care about the number. I wouldn't have any of them. If I was having a party tomorrow, none of them would be there, right? Universal feedback. And it was irrespective of geography, US, Middle East, Europe. Same feedback, right? So here's the reality for us as sales leaders. The vast majority of our teams can't stand us, right? And you know what? All through my career, I've kept in touch with a lot of AEs, and they continue to feed me these horror stories. So I know, the research doesn't lie. I know that from my own experience, right? And the fact that you're all laughing, you've all been there. Everybody can see that. So I then take it to the next step and I go to sales leaders. I set up a LinkedIn group. And I also, outside the LinkedIn group, I think I interviewed maybe 50, 60 sales leaders. And I asked them the same question, right? Outside of an opportunity review, how much coaching did you do? And these sales leaders weren't in the same companies, right? There's no correlation between companies, outside of opportunity reviews, how much coaching? If you coach, why do you coach? If you don't, why don't you? Same thing, right? How much coaching did I do? None. And what was amazing was the LinkedIn group, right? Because this brought in consultants and coaches and, getting all of their feedback. And people are like, well, I employ you to sell. Why do I need to coach, right? And the really good people were honest enough to say, I've never been coached. I don't know how to coach. And then the other one that came up time and time again was, well, I have no time, right? I can't have time in terms of coaching. So you kind of take this, right? You got account execs, you got salesmen, saleswomen going, never been coached in my life, and you got sales leaders honest enough to say, I do 0 coaching, right? You don't have to be Einstein to figure out why 50% of a sales team are not achieving their targets, are not achieving their numbers.
So the other thing I'm thinking about, Will, is about the mindsets. You know that Consalia Mindsets, it's the core of our foundation for all the three pillars we work, right? So the education, the consulting, and the digital piece. For the audience reference, so the four sales mindsets that came like the best ones that the buyers are expecting from salespeople in a global research we did, and we are refreshing now. By the way, happy to, if someone wants to join this new refresh, happy to happy to join. So our tactful audacity, proactive creativity, client centricity, and authenticity. I believe that, you know, if I can think about these kind of trade deals with so many uncertainties about, you know, the direction, uncertainties about things you don't know all the influences, you don't know all what's going on in every industry, in every company, in every country, right? I think you should probably excel in tactful audacity and proactive creativity to make a deal. And I'm pretty sure that the negotiations between UK and US have had a lot of it. But I'm not sure about the client centricity or the authenticity. Because at the end, if you think about client centricity, probably the team that is negotiating on behalf of the UK is thinking on UK, it's not thinking on US, right? At the same time, they are buyers and sellers. So it's a complex negotiation. And on the other side, authenticity is something that becomes complicated when you don't have all the cards with you, right? So what do you think on this?
Yeah, I think you touch on a really important subject, which comes into the values and belief systems. And I think this is something that is, you know, something we're always trying to translate. And within the context of this discussion today, it feels, you know, like values, you know, what are the values that we're seeing that's covering the news agenda, and are they aligned to our own? And you know, when we talk about values and when we talk about you know, making sure that you are operating from a position of client centricity and authenticity, I mean, when you pinpoint these two values, we're really talking about how to generate trust. And right now, I feel I feel there's a question mark over how tariffs and trade deals are coming about, and is it from a position of trust? Is it from a position of aligned values? And this is a question. I don't think anyone quite knows the answer to this. But what we are seeing is an incredibly proactive, creative approach and tactfully audacious approach coming from the US, but without the trust element, it feels, well, to me, again, happy to be disputed by anyone who might be listening, it feels like there's a shift in values. It feels as if we are somewhat pandering. Is that maybe a too strong a word? Pandering to a dominant party, and as a result, it's, you know, as a result, it feels like we're not operating from a position of trust.
So the title is, Can Vision and Coaching be Combined as a Strategy to Reduce Attrition of Sales Professionals in the Backdrop of the Great Resignation? Okay, so I guess, why is this important? In fact, before I ask that, is anybody in the room who is not familiar with the term the Great Resignation, or hasn't heard about it, read about it, etc.? No, okay, good, that helps. So the phrase was actually first coined by a professor at May Business School at Texas University, a chap called Anthony Klotz, back in 2021. And it became a real sort of global phenomenon. It got a lot of kind of media attention, and I was kind of certainly keen to try and understand a little bit more about really kind of what was driving it. But there's one thing I can absolutely assure you, which is, whilst we can probably sit here and debate the longevity of the Great Resignation, in 21 and in 2022, it was absolutely real. So I want to give you a kind of sense of the gratitude of the kind of scale of the issue, basically. So you probably recall kind of, the media being dominated with headlines like this. And like I said, like any kind of phenomenon, I wanted to kind of really try and get under the skin around what was actually driving this. Because what I was certainly seeing within my own business at the time was that we were seeing some really unprecedented movement within our kind of sales community, and almost a mass migration of salespeople that were really taking advantage of a kind of moment in time for various reasons to kind of impact their own lives. And really to kind of understand the scale of the problem, we kind of really need to get into the numbers on this. So let me just explain these graphs for you. So the source of this data is the Office of National Statistics. And when I started this research journey back in early 21, what you can see, this graph on the left, which is a view of people moving job to job through resignation, as you can see, there was a huge spike which continued through 21 and was at the highest point in record. And this is UK data, the source being the ONS. And equally, if you look at the corresponding view on number of vacancies within the UK, again, you can see this dramatic spike in terms of vacancies versus people moving job to job through resignation. Now, here's the thing, right? So replacement cost for sales professionals is estimated to be anywhere between about 1.5 to 2 times annual salary, depending on the kind of grade or experience or track record of sales professionals. And if you think about the unprecedented movement in the employment market, this is just another thing that's creating a real downward pressure on earnings for organizations at the moment. And there was a point that Patrick made actually this morning, talking about salary inflation. So certainly what I was seeing was that, some very average salespeople were able to command some very, very high salaries at the time because businesses were competing so hard to attract and retain, talent. And that model is unsustainable. Right? It's not sustainable. And there will become a point where the market cools and, an FD is going to look at his P&L and look at all his FTE lines and suddenly start to look at the ROI of those hires and determine actually, did we overpay for these people? And the reality is at that time, yes. So as I said, I think one thing is for sure, right? The very best salespeople will always be highly prized recruits to competing organizations. So there's a saying that says, the key to a good story is not kind of what or how, but why. Why is this happening? And this is a view from Gartner from an interesting article called "Resignation or Not, Money Won't Fix All of Your Talent Problems." And I think what's quite interesting here is they created this model, which was a view looking at all of the causes of attrition, and they kind of segmented it. And as we know, Gartner liked to create a model for pretty much everything, whether it's the hype cycle or the magic quadrant. Well, this one was based around attrition. And what I thought was quite interesting is when they looked at the organizational triggers for employee attrition, and they called out 3 things, actually: lack of personal growth opportunities, lack of managerial support for career advancement, and a lack of recognition for contribution, which I thought was quite interesting. So that's one external view that's out in the public domain right now. But if I were to kind of just summarize my secondary data sources, so this is the external literature that I was kind of researching to get a view of, why are people quitting their jobs, basically. And interestingly, there was a research firm called Statista that basically looked at the period from April 21 to 22 and did quite a significant survey. Their sample set was in excess of 13,000. It was a global survey, and it covered the UK. And essentially, they looked at all the reasons people were quitting. And as you can probably see, it's the top bar graph with the horizontal bars in the top right. And lack of career development and advancement was the number one at 41%, which topped pay. And I'll come on to pay shortly, because I think there is still a misconception around pay and salespeople and what motivates them primarily. And interestingly, the other thing that came out of my secondary research was that disengaged employees have a higher propensity to leave organizations. Now, that probably seems quite a logical assumption. But interestingly, there was some research done by Forbes, and this study looked at, it basically looked at the relationship between employee engagement and meaningful organizational vision. And essentially what that study found was that those people that found their organization's vision meaningful were much more deeply engaged, which was an interesting correlation. I'm going to come back to that. But essentially, what you've got here, figure one, is really an illustration of the relationship between the macroeconomic conditions, the problem and the opportunity statement, and the research questions. So to summarize, if vision improves engagement and coaching supports personal development and growth, can vision and coaching be combined as a strategy to reduce attrition of sales professionals in the backdrop of the Great Resignation?
So, the funding rug has been pulled. What options are realistically on the table? And, for any employer listening, obviously there are alternatives. There are different apprenticeships that you could consider at a lower standard than the level 7. For Consalia, we're just focusing on the higher degree and postgraduate apprenticeships that we run.
Yeah.
However, we do know from our experience, again, just focusing on sales, there are different options that you could put your leadership team on, but it's a question as to whether you're seeing leadership development as essential or an expendable skill set. And, our perspective is, it's certainly essential at the moment, especially as I think we're working in such a period of time that is as uncertain as it is, and also one that is really pushing organizations to innovate rapidly with the AI on everyone's doorstep and everything like that. So there are alternatives to consider. Like, do you put your leadership team on an MSc program outside of the apprenticeship framework? That's an option. There are developing coaching cultures, putting your leadership teams through sales coaching for transformation, for example, and hybrid learning models. There are different ways that you can develop the leadership skills over time. But I think it needs kind of real buy-in from the top. And it's too early. It's too early to tell, Jesus, whether or not we're going to see that. I'm hoping that those who are currently doing a level 7 have seen the impact, whether it's in senior sales leadership or any other level 7 program, and they will continue to invest in training people to that.
You're completely right? So this is like a proof of fire. So that you are completely right. I mean, the companies that were enjoying the funding for level 7, and now they have to think about the outcome, the return on investment because it's not just the money provided by the government. As I say, it's time of the professionals engaged in a program. So it's time they are not selling; they are just being educated, right? So they really need to see into the return on investment of this. And if the numbers work, I mean, they are salespeople; they will just buy into it, right? They will have to. Then we come into the bureaucracy internally in the company, because then it's not something that comes funded from the government. is something that comes from the budget of the company. So then you have to talk with finance, then you have to talk to different departments. And then from the budget you were expecting to spend on the 2026, maybe you need to think about, okay, I need to reserve some part of the budget for this training. And then you have to justify and go through committees and blah, blah, blah. But, and sometimes this is depending on the size of the organization. This is not easy. So that's the reason why I'm fully with you. It needs full ownership from the top. It needs intent, because you really cannot download transformation, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think there's been so much focus on this recent announcement on kind of early careers, developing the early career teams. But what happens if the mid-career professionals can't grow, or the senior leadership teams don't? Well, what's the implication of this, Jesus?
Well, that's a huge risk, because as I said before, day to day, all the sales professionals are looking into their sales leaders, what they do, what are their mindsets, their sales mindsets, what is their behaviors, what is their culture. If they are not properly trained, properly educated in one direction, then it's like you can even have multiple directions in a company. Maybe you can have some of the sales mindsets that are not positive and negative. So the sales leadership is not something you do well by accident. If we stop developing the people leading teams today, we stall cultural change, customer innovation, and performance gains.
Just before we get into the crux of what this year's GST event is all about, I wondered if you had any kind of highlights from previous GSTs. What are some of the moments that have stood out to you the most over the years?
I've been thinking about this question, and it, of course, it's going to be really, really difficult to kind of pull things out, because each time we run the event, we say, do you know what? That's been the best event we've run so far. But if I go back in time and look at some of the speakers that we've had who've had a huge impact, I think on the audience, I think Sir Graham Lamb coming in was quite a big one. He came in as an ex 3-star general. He was a director of the SAS, and we asked him if he could talk about resilience. And in fact, he's on a podcast of ours as well. Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting. He's completely unlike any sort of general-like figure you would imagine. He walked on stage with his leather jacket and with his broad Scottish accent. But you could tell immediately comes across as a person who is incredibly thoughtful, with great gravitas. And of course, he's had some quite amazing experiences that he was able to not talk in detail about. And so his was really amazing. But we've equally, and we've had Olympic, downhill skiers who are blind, coming, sort of sharing their experiences, and not just talking about resilience, but also talking about partnership and coaching and so on. So if I talk about those that we've invited who aren't in the sort of Consalia immediate family, those are two. There's also John Ardis, who is ex military intelligence and so on, talking about ways of conducting critical thinking, and he was absolutely hilarious. Dr. Samuel West, the Museum of Culture. I always talk about him and the importance of psychological safety.
Of course.
So when you look back on it, we really have had quite an eclectic group of people that have come in. But I suppose the proudest moments are when you see our master students actually taking the podium and sort of sharing their particular piece of research and seeing how far they have grown in terms of confidence and standing up in front of that sort of kind of audience is not that easy to do, but yeah, it makes you feel quite proud, really, of what's been achieved over the years. So it's a great platform to kind of showcase, from people who are quite humble, often, great insights and great achievements. I think another proud moment, so there's so many, was when we had our first level 6 students graduate, and we invited
of
them
course.
to come up onto the platform, and we gave them all a round of applause. And for them, it's amazing to be in the company of such influential sales leaders in that sort of environment. And it's always wonderful to have some of our level 6 students, just embarking on their sales career, join us as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's so many, sort of different highlights, and in a way, it's unfair not to single everyone out who's played a role in contributing, to the success of the program.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, I guess that brings me on to obviously this year's event. And for those who are listening, if you are interested in coming, please mark your calendars for the 27th of November 2025 at the London Stock Exchange, just as Phil has alluded to there. So Phil, this year's event, I wonder if we can talk a little bit more about it. So the title for this year's event is Winning the Right Way. And I think we're taking more of a human element to everything that's going on around us in terms of AI, right? So we're focusing on the human connection in the age of AI. But I wondered if perhaps you could dive deeper into why we chose this as the theme and why it's particularly relevant right now.
Well, I think it's really difficult right now to get away from the impact AI is having on the sales industry, and so its kind of relevance is becoming rapidly, increasingly more important. And so it would be wrong not to address this topic kind of full on. And of course, since we had the impetus, I guess, from ChatGPT, when it was, formally launched, we're now beginning to see some maturity in some of the AI models and some of the diversity of the different ways it's being used to kind of provide tools and frameworks for salespeople to use. So yeah, it's reached definitely a more, a mature level, a more mature level of development. So AI, yeah, we AI clearly is important, but we've focused on the human connection. And I think this is because there is, I think, great concern amongst us and our clients about the authenticity of the usage of AI. And so we wanted to kind of bring these two strands together, the human connection. And the human connection, I think, to some extent, is going to be a kind of revisit of some of the research that I started, all those years ago with the doctorate on how do customers want to be sold to. And we decided for the 20th anniversary that we should come back to that particular sort of topic with up-to-date research. And it's been very interesting already sort of interviewing people in Asia, in Europe, about to start the Americas quite soon, to get their sense of the kind of relationships that customers are looking for from salespeople in this world of AI. So yeah, the event is going to have these two strands. One, an AI strand, sort of exploring how technology is having an effect on how we manage and lead sales. And then the other is going to be a revisit back to the kind of values that customers are looking for from salespeople, which will surface from the global research project. And we're going to bring these two themes together. I think the technology theme is going to be partly influenced by a very exciting relationship where we're building with Aviso, in the top right hand of the magic quadrant according to IDC around the use of AI in sales automation, and we have Trevor, who's the CEO, going to be flying over from New York to actually sort of give a keynote talk about the world as they see it and how they're beginning to sort of look at the adoption of AI across the incredible number of clients have already started to acquire. But coupled with that will be a more authentic experience with the users of AI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's why we've called it the human connection in the age of AI and winning in the right way. I just want to kind of refer to the first opening part of your dissertation, in which you said there's no chapter in a textbook that tells you how to become the kind of marketing leader you wish you had.
Yeah.
And which is it's a great way to start, actually. So, where did that come from? What prompted that particular opening?
So I think throughout this whole master's journey, it's been like a journey in itself. And there's been a lot of reflection that's gone on in the past 2 years, and I think being on a master's that is all around developing your own sort of leadership and how to be the kind of leader you want to be, you start reflecting back on the leaders that you have worked for. And the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I thought, actually, had there been any leaders or marketing leaders that I've worked for who I thought, yeah, I want to be in their position in 10, 15 years' time. Not purely because of like their job role, but more so how they treated people, how they ran the function and whatnot. And that line around, you can't really find a textbook that will tell you how to become a leader. It really kind of resonates with me because I thought, actually, it's true. Leadership is developed through experiences. And that was the foundation of what started off this kind of project. The fact that I didn't really feel I had a leader who I kind of aspired to be within the marketing function, which is quite it's quite a controversial statement, I'm sure.
Well, it is controversial, but actually, I know on the master's programs we do ask that question, at various points about, how many managers have you sort of been inspired by? And I know that one of our other alumni had conducted a LinkedIn survey where he'd reached out and invited sales leaders within his network to give comments about how many people have you worked for that have really inspired you. And the numbers are very small. I mean, it's like you can count them on one hand, and I think he got a really large sample size. So really interesting to see you again sort of make reference to that. And I guess it's a great, it's a very good question. When you start to define your own leadership, what sort of leader do you want to be?